Thank you for joining me for another Quick Hits conversation. I'm Dr. Robyn. I'm a concierge high-performance psychologist providing luxury-level support to executives, entrepreneurs, celebrities, and athletes. With me today, I have Chelle Shapiro. She's a marketing strategist for wellness coaches and consultants and recognized as one of the top 15 LinkedIn experts in New York City, as well as the author of the book, Loving Yourself Isn't Selfish. I have Jim Tam. He's a principal client director with Korn Ferry's Digital Group, where he advises organizations on how to improve their sales effectiveness through using world-class sales methodology and technology. And I have Christina Kelley. She works with Today Media, helping customers reach their target audience through digital, print, and events. The question I have today, how did you learn to stand up to peer pressure? Jim, kick us off.
Yeah, when I thought about that question, I was just thinking about, well, I guess really all depends on what's at stake. Let's say you have a bunch of people say, hey, I want to go to McDonald's, but you want to go to Wendy's. So it's really not a big monumental decision. But if somebody says, hey, I want you to have a drink with me and it's dry January, how do you not cave in? But it really all depends on how much do you need that person's approval. And if you don't, stand up. But I think a lot of it has to do with confidence in yourself.
Hearing the question, I was thinking, you think about peer pressure often in the context of younger kids, teenagers, as I have one. As an adult, it is a different conversation. I agree with what Jim said. What is the context and what's happening? Oftentimes there's an event or something going on and there's a little pressure to like, oh, we're going to keep it going and go to XYZ afterwards. And you know that that's not going to suit you. So I think you have to kind of go with what feels right to you at the time. I'm a big fan of having an exit strategy before I even begin. So whether that's another commitment or I'm going to be able to do this part, but not that part, because you have to establish boundaries. Otherwise your schedule gets very hijacked and it might not be things that you want to do. So really what feels right, I think you just learn through doing and making some bad choices while not having boundaries.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback on what both Christina and Jim have said. When I think about what's at stake or how the pressure makes me feel, or like not just for their approval, but how I feel internally, is it something that's going to give me a little bit of a thrill or a rush of getting caught? Or is it something that like just doesn't sit right with me? And I've definitely tested the waters in the past in my younger years, but also professionally of this doesn't feel good. And I don't see a good outcome happening here, but feeling pressured to do it anyway. And I've definitely had to learn from that of like, all right, I'm going to stick to those boundaries and this doesn't feel right. And here's what I could be doing instead. And really taking the time to assert myself, to do something different and stand on the other side of the fence. And that doesn't mean that I'm necessarily going to rat them out, but it just means that I'm not going to partake in that. But I think it needs to be done enough times in order for you to be like, all right, this is a boundary for me and I'm not willing to cross it no matter what you're tempting me with.
Speaking about enough times, I had a situation in my 20s that taught me something about peer pressure that I didn't even realize. I was at a party. I had had one drink. That was my limit. And the guy came around with the margarita pitcher and he was filling everybody's glass. And I was talking and I just set my hand over my glass and he went on. And the guy next to me who I was talking to set his hand over his glass. And then when he took his hand away, the guy with the pitcher filled it. And the guy I was talking to said, wait a minute, she puts her hand over the glass and you say, okay, fine, you pass her by. I put my hand, you fill it. Why? And the guy with the pitcher said, because when she says she had enough, if I give her more, she wastes it. If you say you've had enough and I give you more, you drink it.
Interesting.
And so there's something about having a boundary and maintaining it that makes people not push it as often. Because he had obviously seen me do that, where I had said no and he had given me more and it got wasted.
When I think about peer pressure, obviously you think about teenagers, but I think there's this longing to be accepted in getting approval from your peers. But I think as you mature and then you have a lot more self-confidence and then you start having your values, to what Chelle was saying about this, that line that you don't want to cross. And as long as you maintain who you are, you can look yourself in the mirror the next day and say, I'm okay with that.
It's interesting though. I do know, because I talk to a lot of people who travel for work, and when they travel to places, there's this pressure, come out to dinner, come out for drinks, stay out talking. It's 2 a.m, you're jet lagged, you have to get up for a meeting at 8 and they expect you to still be up. I see that happen all the time. And when I ask people, why do you give in to that kind of peer pressure? They're like, well, I kind of have to for my career. And I'm like, but why? What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with that. I don't travel much, but I have been to conferences and situations where dinner is kind of expected as part of the plan. I think that, as Jim said, when you're not looking for acceptance, you care a little bit less what people think. Sometimes you just have to bail out gracefully and go to your room. I'm a big fan of the Irish exit, as some of my friends would call it. Just put my time in and then I'm out. I bail. I don't explain. I don't feel the need to say goodbye to everyone. I showed up. I did what I needed to do. And now I will go to sleep because I want to feel good the next day.
That's interesting, actually, that you said about your exit strategy. When that's come up for me, I have to let people know my plan before I execute. And so I will go into it. If it's something that I know I don't want to stick around the whole time, I will announce at the beginning, hey, I'm only staying for 15 minutes and then I got to go do this other thing. That way, everybody already knows what my plan is. Even if I do end up having a better time, then I get to decide without feeling the pressure.
I do believe that there is a norm in terms of work, in terms of being able to let people know who you are outside the office. And I think it is encouraged that you should take advantage of some of these opportunities if you've been invited, because eventually you might stop getting that invitation, and it could also alienate you from your coworkers, as well as miss out on opportunities for advancement. And I do think it's real. I'll share a personal story. When I was a senior in college, one of my brother's friends gave me some advice. He said, Jim, you know why agents don't make it? A lot of times they're the first to get hired, but the last to get promoted, because they are not as social as other people. And I thought about that. It's like, sometimes you just need to play the game. And I try to make myself available for happy hour and just kind of just join the softball team and do a lot of these things. And he was absolutely right with that type of advice. You don't put yourself in certain situations if you keep opting out.
Does the peer pressure in a professional setting to stay and be there and be seen have something to do with whether you get promoted or not? And I feel like it must, because people stay out.
I actually enjoy going out and playing softball and doing all these things, but now it's a little bit more intentional in terms of the reason. And I do think it's important, because people who go home, eventually they somehow just don't advance as quickly.
Ladies, do you find that if you do leave a situation like that, have there been repercussions? Have you gotten feedback like, oh, you should be here more?
I think in some scenarios, it's added a little humor where someone will be like, oh, what happened to you last night? We went from A to B. And it doesn't happen often, especially in sales and being in certain roles. You could be social 24/7 every night of the week if you wanted to. And you have to weigh what's important. Is getting a yoga class important, or just having 3 hours where I have nothing on the calendar?
That's okay too.
It's okay to say I have plans, and they could be to do nothing. And I think that's important.
I think it can have the opposite effect too. If you leave early too often enough, or if you don't participate in certain things, as Jim said, you might find yourself not getting asked to do those things again, or to join again, and you lose out on those opportunities for growth going forward. But the opposite can be true too, where if you go out too much, and if you're a big partier, or you just let your hair down a little bit, and then people get to see a different side of you than they would in the office. And if you do that past a certain point, then people might not invite you either, because then you're not functional the next day, or because then you're coming off in a way that doesn't represent or bode well for the company. So I think you have to walk that fine line of what is acceptable and feels okay for you, and that boundary, without crossing it and doing yourself a disservice either way.
Well, I think we've really highlighted why peer pressure is a thing. and how hard it is to kind of decide what's right for you and what's not. So thank you so much for having this conversation with me. And I look forward to speaking to each of you again really soon.